Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm so excited to be sharing my first time using Pinkfresh Studio products for a new release. I picked these three background stamps from the February 2020 lineup, and I thought I'd share my approach and a few techniques I like using for background stamps. I know everyone has background stamps in their crafty stash, and if not, the Pinkfresh ones are definitely worth checking out. I have the new collection link below, as well as other Pinkfresh items I used for the projects I'll show you in this video. So for the first card, I'll be using the Pinkfresh Enchanted Blooms 6x6 rubber background stamp. This gorgeous stamp has individual floral images as well as assorted foliage. This stamp has plenty of negative space, and I'll be using that to my advantage for this card. Okay, so if foam-backed cling rubber stamps are new to you, they're just as easy to use as photopolymer stamps. Simply take off and set aside the plastic backing sheet. Remove the foam mat from your MISTI if you're using a stamp positioning tool, and your stamp will cling to the MISTI door and fit perfectly in your magnetic platform. You will need the original sized MISTI to fit the rubber stamps, and I'll link to that in the description box. I will quickly stamp the floral background onto some Nina Solar White 80 pound in a Copic friendly black ink. Then I'll color portions of the panel that I know I can fussy cut. So that means I won't color the entire panel of flowers and leaves, and I'll color enough elements to create a small cluster bouquet on my card. I've done this before on my channel where I create my own bouquets, but for this background stamp, I'm simply manipulating the positive space of the stamp to create my own group of images. This is one of many ways to stretch these background stamps. Once I'm done coloring, I'll move on to the assembly portion of this card. Like I said, I'll fussy cut these images, trying to leave a narrow white margin around the images. I like using this Fiskars swivel knife, but of course you can do whatever you're comfortable with. I'll cut the background into many pieces. I will solely cut the leaves I colored and won't keep the stems to the leaves. I'll keep doing this to the flowers and other leaves until I've cut all the images that I've colored. So you'll see I still have many other opportunities to color and create my own arrangements, so I'll keep this panel with the stamp when I'm done for future projects. I've quickly arranged the images on my craft mat and grabbed the intricate mandala die set from Pinkfresh to see if I can contain the entire arrangement within the mandala. By the way, some of the Pinkfresh die sets already contain a magnetic sheet, so that you don't have to worry about losing the dies within your stamp packaging. I love those small details to help us crafters out. I'll set the die cut mandala aside for a moment and grab the Phrase Builder Sending die set. I'll die cut the vibe sentiment without the shadow layer and cut the S with my scissors to make the word singular. Then I'll set the sentiment component aside as well and grab another panel of white cardstock. I'll do a quick offset spotlight ink blend in a bright yellow-orange to look like a mandala sun. Then I'll add gold splatters using a Finetech pearlescent color palette. While that sunburst panel is drying, I'll finish off the vibe sentiment with some black cardstock and finally start assembling the card. After gluing the sunburst panel to my note card base, I'll glue the mandala on top of the yellow section and trim off the overhang to be flush with the panel. Then I'll glue down the flower cluster on top of the mandala, leaving a little overhang from one of the flowers. I'll also glue down the vibe sentiment as well as this embossed label so that the sentiment is "It's a Vibe." To balance out the black sentiment, I'll add black sequins, and that finishes this positive fussy cut background example. For the second example, let's continue using the positive portions of the background stamps with Floral Diamond background stamp from Pinkfresh. This is a repeat background stamp with clean lines, perfect on its own for a background, but let's elevate the image and make something interesting and modern. I'm going to take a panel of black cardstock and stamp the image using Versamark watermark ink. I'll use this to gold heat emboss the panel. Once the entire panel is beautiful and shiny, I'll play with positive space again to create square tiles. Now there are two ways to do this. I'll use a square die that is 1 1/4 inches to cut segments of this black panel. You can frame these tiles however you want, but I'm going to use the flowers as my corners in my example. The second way to make tiles is using a straight edge and a craft knife or your paper trimmer to cut the background panel. Now I could only yield 5 complete tiles using the 1 1/4 size square. I will partially cut this panel for incomplete tiles to help fill in empty spaces on my card base. You'll see what I mean in a second. After planning the placement of the squares, I'll begin gluing down the black and gold tiles. I'm quite neurotic when it comes to patterns like this, so I used my ruler to make sure the spacing was even between the tiles. And once I've glued down the larger pieces, I trimmed the tiles to fit flush on my white card panel. But I made sure to save the offcuts to fill in these empty white spaces in the corners. I glued the offcuts, then trimmed the tiles to sit flush again. This panel is cool on its own, but I'll pair this tiled background with some other Pinkfresh items. I'll use this beautiful 6x8 stamp set and coordinating dies called Simple Blossoms. I stamped the images according to the layering guide examples found on the stamp packaging in a bright palette to balance the bold black tiles I made earlier. I'll use the coordinating dies to cut out the stamped images and plan a quick arrangement on my craft mat. Before gluing down the flowers to my tiled background, I'll add black splatters to help fill in the white void. Also, the variation in splatters will help break up the rigid pattern of tiles. To help introduce more variation in circles, I'll also add bunched up embroidery floss behind the floral arrangement. Oh, and I went ahead and stamped the beautiful thanks sentiment from the same Simple Blossom stamp set. Then after gluing down the flowers and leaves, I finished the card with some gold sequins that matched the gold embossing tiles. And that finishes the second example using the positive space on background stamps. Okay, so last example. So here is Diamond Tiles Rubber Stamp. You're probably like, well, why didn't you make tiles out of this stamp set? Well, because something about the negative space in this stamp set reminded me of rattan. I wanted to try to see how I could create texture out of this flat image. So this stamp is going into my original Misty, and I'm going to grab two panels, one in this light gray and one in white. I'll white heat emboss the gray panel and stamp the white panel with light gray ink. Now I'll take this square die, this one is 3/4 of an inch, and cut out all the negative space to these two panels. It's quite labor intensive, but I'm thrilled with the resulting lattice panels I'm left with. I'm going to cut both panels in half and make sure the edges are uniform. I'll take two of these cut panels, one gray and one white, and start using this lattice in a card. I'm going to use the Just Because stamp and die set and make a loose watercolor floral. I'm doing this by stamping the large flower cluster in black VersaFine pigment ink and clear heat embossing the image. Once the image is heat set, I'll use the embossing powder as a barrier for my watercolor pigments. I'll spray the entire panel with water and quickly drop in concentrated watercolor into the petals and leaves. I make a lot of watercolor boo-boos, but that's sort of the point. I'm not looking for anything exact as I'm watercoloring. In fact, I'm using this technique to counter the rough edges of the lattice background. Once the flower image is dry, I'll add white splatters and die cut the image using the coordinating die cut. I added a sentiment banner from the Just Because stamp set and finished the card with silver sequins. With the second lattice pair, I made a simple card using the Phrase Builder Sending die set and an embossed label as my statement piece. And those are my 4 cards I made using 3 of the Pinkfresh Studio rubber background stamps. Let me know which one is your favorite in the comments below. If you're new to my channel, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and share it with your Pinkfresh friends. I'm so excited I got the chance to use Pinkfresh products for the first time, so I thank the Pinkfresh Studio team for sending these products my way to share with you all. Hey, thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll talk to you all very soon, and have the best day.